Hello and welcome to Sleep with Ollie. This is a place where we slow down, let go, and gently fall asleep. I'm your sleep companion, Oliver, but you can call me Ollie. It's truly a pleasure to meet you tonight. If your mind feels full, if your thoughts won't quiet down, you're in the right place here. There's no pressure, no noise, just calm stories and a voice to guide you into sleep. So relax, close your eyes, and let Sleep with Ollie carry you away. Now, we're about to begin a dreamy retelling of a story you may have heard before, Beauty and the Beast. Camille stood still, gazing in awe at the view before her. Both the overly grand gardens and the towering, harsh, and unsettling walls of the house were more magnificent than anything she had ever seen before. The sight was overwhelming, yet at the same time, its simple grandeur was mesmerizing. As a girl who had grown up in a village, Camille felt almost breathless. In the face of such vastness, she could feel the mystery of this place deep within her. Even the stones seemed as though they had been waiting in silence for a very long time, as if they were in a deep sleep, hoping to be discovered again. She wondered what kind of work she would be expected to do, and hoped that it would not be beyond her abilities. As the former caretaker of a simple cottage, she felt lost in uncertainty. When they reached the wide steps, Laurent slowly stopped the horse and the cart. The wind blew from the sides, as if trying to push them away from the entrance of the building. He climbed the stairs, lifted the heavy door knocker slowly, and let it fall. Father and daughter stood waiting on the steps, expecting the stern owner of the house to appear. But to their surprise, the door opened by a child. The boy looked about 13 years old and was dressed simply like a villager. He leaned his head through the doorway and examined them with curiosity. Then, as if satisfied with what he saw, he nodded. "Is one of you the new servant?" he asked. Laurent was momentarily confused, but then explained that he had brought his daughter, and that Camille would repay the debt by working in his place. The boy nodded, as if this was nothing unusual, and pulled the door open firmly, inviting Camille inside. Then he told Laurent that he could leave Camille's belongings in the grand entrance hall and go. After that, the boy hurried away into the depths of the house to announce the arrival of the new servant. As the wind moved behind her, Camille stepped inside through the doorway and into her new life for Laurent and Camille. It was an emotional farewell, but both of them tried to remain strong. Laurent turned his faithful horse toward home, the gloomy sky seeming to press down upon them. He did not look back until he had passed through the gates of the chateau. Then the swaying trees of the forest closed behind him. Camille stood hesitantly in the echoing corridor. The grey light of the cloudy day filtered in through the tall windows above the door, but it brought no warmth to the space. Suppressing her shiver, she stepped a little closer to the chest that held her belongings. She reminded herself that she needed to gather her courage and do the best she could. A few minutes later, the boy came running back into the hall and said that the Baron wanted her to be taken to her room. With that, he cheerfully lifted her chest and began carrying it up the wide, curving staircase. Camille followed him, surprised that they were going upstairs instead of heading to the kitchen or to a room on the lower floor. Perhaps she would be staying in the attic. Despite her confusion, yet the boy turned into the first large corridor. They walked through the eastern wing of the chateau, along a corridor lined with rich carpets, their quiet footsteps passing beneath the gaze of portraits that seemed to belong to nobles of a distant past. It felt as though they were the true residents, and she was an unexpected and unwelcome guest. Camille was so absorbed in looking at them that when the boy suddenly stopped and opened a door, she nearly walked into him. She followed him inside and found herself standing still in surprise. She was in the most beautiful bedroom she had ever seen. The room was not very large, and the furnishings were simple, but the canopy bed, the fine fabrics, and the rich woodwork were truly magnificent. As she looked around, she noticed a comfortable window seat and a small dressing table, just as the boy spoke and lit a fire in the fireplace. As the fire began to crackle, he stood up, brushed off his hands, and smiled at her. "I'm Gabriel," he said, "and I help the Baron with this and that around here." I'm very glad you've come. It can get a little lonely here sometimes, and I could use some help with the daily work. Camille was not sure how to respond, and she also wondered what exactly daily work meant. Instead, she thanked him for the fire and asked when she would meet her new employer. Gabriel told her that the Baron would see her tomorrow and explain her duties. Then, for now, he said, he would bring her a simple dinner and hoped she would rest well for the night. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Gabriel left the room and quietly closed the door behind him. Camille gathered herself and began to unpack her things. She hung her clothes in the large wardrobe and carefully placed her few books on the small table beside the bed. When she opened the book above and turned its pages, she saw the pink rose placed between them and gave herself a faint, melancholic smile. She closed the book again and set it aside. Walking toward the window, she parted the heavy curtains and settled herself into the soft cushions of the window seat. From there, she could see the courtyard in a wide view, along with the stone walls and the overgrown gardens spreading wildly along the edges of the pathways. It was nearing dusk, and the wind scattered particles across the stone courtyard, spinning them into small spirals. Dark clouds passed one by one in front of the rising moon. The exhaustion from her journey and from this new life wrapped her like a cocoon within the curtains, and before long, she drifted into sleep. She awoke to the sound of knocking at her door. As she rose from the window seat, she consciously slowed her breathing and opened the door. Outside, there was a tray holding a simple dinner: bread, cheese, soup, and warm tea. She looked down the corridor but saw no one. It was clear how silently Gabriel walked. She carried the tray into her room and placed it on the small table beside the fire. She realized how hungry she was and ate everything, down to the last bite. Then, without taking the trouble to prepare, she pulled back the covers, lay down into the warmth of the sheets and the embrace of the pillow, and soon fell asleep. That night, Camille had strange dreams. She saw herself walking through the dark corridors of the chateau, following a large dog. The dog entered different rooms and disappeared, only to reappear in the corridor a few moments later. As she tried to catch it, she came upon a door where it had just vanished. When she looked inside, instead of the dog, she saw the back of a man sitting at a table. The man began to turn in his chair, but before she could see his face, Camille awoke. As she sat up in bed, she saw that the fire had gone out and sunlight was entering through her window. Just as she began to fully wake, her door was knocked again. Outside, Gabriel stood holding a tray. "Good morning, Miss Camille," he said politely. "I've brought you a small breakfast." Then, gesturing toward the entrance, he added, "The Baron will be waiting for you in his study once you are finished." Camille nodded, took the tray, and Gabriel disappeared. Once again, an hour later, Camille stood nervously at the door of the room where her father had once eaten. All the food at the table by the fireplace. She could hear the rustling of papers from inside. She cleared her throat and knocked lightly on the door. The sounds stopped, and she heard a chair scraping against the floor from within. A short moment later, she saw a man with a face covered in thick facial hair. His features were sharply defined in a frightening way, and his expression seemed naturally stern. He was truly an unsettling sight, but Camille tried not to show her feelings. She bowed her head politely in greeting. The large man studied her carefully and nodded in return. Then he gestured for her to sit on a chair near the fire. He himself took the seat across from her and settled into it slowly. "So, you are the one who has come to repay your father's debt. Can you handle basic household tasks such as cleaning and cooking?" Camille nodded, indicating that she could. The man seemed satisfied. He took from a nearby table a heavy ring of keys covered with many keys. "As you can see, I am greatly lacking in help here." Gabriel takes care of my basic needs. His mother brings me bread, milk, and eggs every day. He also goes into town to handle my personal matters. But there is no one other than myself to manage this estate. I am sure you have already noticed that just by looking around. Even in this state, there is far too much work for just you and Gabriel. But we will manage. He paused for a moment, as if expecting a response. Camille was overwhelmed by the thought of being the only servant in such a large mansion. But she thought that saying so would change nothing. The man continued, "These keys open most of the rooms in the house, but you will not need many of them. If there is anything that Gabriel cannot handle, you may come to me. Other than that, I am not a demanding man, and I would prefer that you make decisions about the house on your own as much as possible. I spend most of my time in my study or in the library. Faced with the scale of the task she had been given, Camille felt overwhelmed before she had even begun and could only nod in response, as if to signal that the meeting was over. The man suddenly stood up. Camille rose as well, took the old-looking keys from him, and nodded as she turned to leave the room. The man called after her, "Dinner is at 7. I would be pleased if you joined me in the dining room." Camille bowed her head in thanks and slowly left the study. She stood, somewhat confused, in the echoing entrance hall, feeling both as though she were lost within it, and at the same time as though the place was closing in around her. She spread the heavy keys across her open palm and looked at them thoughtfully. She did not know which doors they opened, but they carried a quiet sense of authority. She was pulled from her thoughts when she saw Gabriel emerging from the shadows, approaching her with a bright smile. He asked if she would like a tour of the chateau. Camille accepted with pleasure, and so her life as a servant in the chateau began. What Camille learned was that the Baron lived alone and had done so for many years because of his frightening appearance. The people nearby were afraid of him. Stories were told about him, and when he appeared in public, they treated him with cold distance. Gabriel was the only bridge between him and the outside world. Years ago, he had begun by doing errands for the Baron, but over time, he had come to like and respect the man behind that distant and unreachable face. He would say that the Baron's bark was worse than his bite. Now, Gabriel stayed at the house each day, handling what private matters he could. At night, he returned to his small family home outside the town. Truly, miss, he insisted, the Baron is a fair and kind man. Gabriel showed Camille the countless rooms and corridors of the chateau, which had begun to suffer from neglect. Many of the rooms stretching along the gloomy corridors were no longer used. Room after room covered in layers of dust, the keys in Camille's hand, opening one after another. The fireplaces were cold. Some rooms had not been used for decades, even centuries. Objects and furniture were piled together and covered in cobwebs. The window glass was covered with years of grime, and because of this, the light from outside filtered in only faintly. As Camille noticed, her task had become easier. There were only a few rooms that were used each day, and she needed to clean and organize those. These included the kitchen, the Baron's study, and the entrance hall. But the place that impressed her most was the library. Gabriel allowed Camille to look inside while the Baron was occupied elsewhere, and Camille was astonished by what she saw. A vast room with a high ceiling and golden details opened before her. Bookshelves covered every wall, from one end to the other, reaching all the way to the top, except where the windows stood. Movable ladders on both sides of the room stood ready to slide along the shelves, waiting to carry any visitor to whichever book they desired. There were countless books, their spines in shades of crimson, forest green, deep blue, and brown. Each one seemed to wait to be taken down and carefully explored. Camille had always been an eager reader of the few books her father had owned before his downfall, but she had never seen or even imagined such a collection. According to Gabriel, the Baron spent most of his time here. The tables within this grand refuge were covered with books left open on certain pages or gathered in small groups. 2 old leather chairs seemed to tell of long hours spent turning those heavy pages. Gabriel turned to her and said, seriously, that she must keep the fire in the fireplace alive throughout the day. Camille imagined opening one of these countless books and sinking into a soft chair, breathing in the scent of old ink-filled pages. Even the thought was enchanting. Camille realized that the only way to make progress in this neglected chateau was to choose a place and begin. On the first day, she worked with Gabriel, dusting the entrance hall and cleaning the kitchen. Gabriel and the Baron had long prepared simple meals there, but much of the space seemed to need attention. Camille was not a skilled cook, but restoring the kitchen brought her a quiet sense of satisfaction. She sent Gabriel into town with a list of supplies to be brought. Then she began to work in the large and silent kitchen. She cleared the unused counters of their dust. The pots and pans received the polish they had long needed. The cold and empty space seemed to come back to life. When it was time to sit down for dinner with the Baron, she had prepared a simple roast chicken. It was not complex, but she was proud of it. Having very little time to compose herself, Camille returned to her room. Gabriel had rekindled the fire there, and she used the wash basin to freshen herself. She put on her finest dress for the evening, and as she walked toward the window to draw the curtains, she paused and looked into the darkness. The courtyard was wrapped in a heavy silence. Nothing moved, not even a bird, as if the entire place were covered by a spell of stillness. She drew the velvet curtains thoughtfully and stepped away. There is so much I must learn about this place, she thought. Then, lighting a candle, she began to walk through the darkened corridor in its velvety twilight and slowly descended the grand staircase. The tall doors of the dining hall looked far too grand for just two people. Once, great gatherings and elaborate, formal dinners must have been held here. Looking up, she admired the great, glittering chandelier hanging above like a canopy of stars. Gabriel had set the table for two at one end of the long table and prepared the meal. She arrived first and did not have to wait long. The Baron's large figure appeared in the doorway. He paused for a brief moment and nodded, as if to say, "Good evening." Then he gestured toward the table for two, inviting her to sit. Camille sat gratefully on one of the upholstered chairs. "I see you have worked hard with Gabriel today," said the Baron, raising his eyebrows out as he looked at the hearty meal she had prepared. "He has carried a heavy burden for years as my only help. It pleases me that you will take on some of his duties." Camille, not knowing how to respond, simply nodded. "My lord," she began to say, but the Baron interrupted her. "Please, you may call me Antoine," he replied. "I am no longer the lord of anything. I am only the lord of this chateau and its dusty remains," he said, with a dark smile. Then, looking into her eyes, he added, "I am sorry that you had to come here under these circumstances, but I hope you will be comfortable here. I try to be a fair man and a companion." Camille nodded and gave a small smile. "Would you like me to arrange the library tomorrow?" she asked. "I was not sure whether you would want me to enter it." The Baron thought for a short moment and nodded, as if to say that it would be appropriate. Then he added, "If you wish, you are free to borrow any book that interests you from the room. After all, as Descartes said, reading good books is like a conversation with the finest minds of past centuries. I believe you will find that my library has quite an impressive capacity to offer every book you have ever heard of." In that sense, it may be considered a little magical. Surprised by his kind offer and his refined words, Camille watched the unfortunate-looking Baron as she ate. She had only been in the chateau for a single day, but all her thoughts about her situation had begun to change. She had become the mistress of a great house with complete freedom to work as she wished, and most importantly, she had gained access to a vast library. Perhaps this twist of fate would not be as dark as she had thought as she looked down quietly at her plate. She could hear only the sound of cutlery touching porcelain. In the firelight, the Baron and Camille spoke very little throughout that dinner and finished their meal in silence. Later, as Camille lay comfortably in her great canopy bed beneath clean white sheets, a sense of hope began to grow within her. This isolated chateau was a place filled with many intriguing secrets, and she found herself eager to discover them. In time, turning onto her side, she gazed sleepily at the curtains drawn tightly against the night outside the window. There was a warmth within this chateau, an unseen flame that kept it alive. She could feel it. The next day, after tidying the kitchen, Camille approached the library with care. She knew the Baron was in his other study, and under the excuse of cleaning, it seemed the perfect moment to explore that magnificent room of books. Taking a cloth in her hand, she began to move methodically around the stacks and between the tables, cleaning away the layers of dust that had gathered over time. Just as she reached to move aside a small pile of books, Antoine appeared in the doorway. Please do not disturb any of the piles and do not touch the open books, he said. Camille quickly withdrew her hand from the book and apologized. There is no need to apologize, he reassured her. I know it looks disordered, but I am conducting research, and I do not wish to lose my place. Then he asked her whether she had chosen a book for herself. Camille said she had not, and asked if he had any recommendation. She admitted that she did not feel educated enough to understand such important works. Her background, having been far more modest. Antoine smiled and, spreading his hands, said, "To be aware of your ignorance is the beginning of wisdom." Seeing her surprise, he gave a playful wink and added that the words belonged to Socrates. Walking through the room, he took a small book from the lower shelves and handed it to her. "Perhaps you will enjoy his other thoughts as well." He strongly believed that we should all ask many questions. Camille thanked him and took the book. As she was about to leave the room, before leaving, she turned back and said that she actually had a question. Would it be possible to hire a few villagers to clear the gardens before winter arrives? She asked. Antoine looked at her with a slightly sad expression and shrugged. "If Gabriel can find villagers who are willing to come to the chateau, you may do so. Unfortunately, most people are afraid to enter its grounds. Over the years, many strange stories have been told about me. That is why I have been alone for so long." Camille frowned with frustration. "How do you endure that?" she asked. "Does it not anger you to be treated so unfairly?" The Baron lowered his head thoughtfully and replied, "Once I was more handsome, but I was also arrogant and foolish. It took a great misfortune for me to see my mistakes. The contempt people show me now is perhaps the price of that foolishness." Camille did not respond. She would not ask more questions today, but she was determined to learn how the Baron had come to be this way. For now, she was eager to return to her room after dinner and read Socrates. Camille quickly grew accustomed to her new life as a servant in the chateau and even began to enjoy it. With a few methods that could almost be called bribery, she managed to persuade Gabriel to hire a few village men who came one day and cleared the gardens of years of neglect. But this only happened after Camille firmly warned them not to damage the rosebush by the pergola. It seemed that this rose had been planted by Antoine's mother and was very special to him. Camille almost regretted bringing the villagers when she heard them speaking badly about Antoine. They say he is a complete monster, one shouted to another. He lives inside like an animal, added another. He has no manners, not fit to be among people, but I'll take his money. The man finished roughly. Camille noticed that Antoine was standing by the window, listening to the entire conversation, as if to protect him from the cruel words of the men. She hurried to close the window, but Antoine dismissed her with a gesture, appearing unbothered. I am used to this kind of talk, he explained. It has been many years since I could be among society. Still, Camille felt saddened. How can you endure such injustice? She asked. People who do not know you, how do you not hate them? Antoine shrugged and spoke while looking thoughtfully at the pile of books on the table near him. The great English playwright William Shakespeare once said, "Do not set fire to your enemy, for in the end you will burn yourself as well." By holding goodwill toward these people, I am, in truth, lightening my own burden, then smiling and nodding. He said to Camille, "You might also enjoy reading Shakespeare. He has written very beautiful plays." With that, he turned back to his books, and Camille was left absorbed in his words and the gloomy day. For part 3, please follow the channel. Ollie wishes you a peaceful night and gentle dreams.